For most of my 20s, I had a strange relationship with my own bank account. I wasn't overspending, exactly. I just never really knew, on any given day, whether I was doing okay. I'd check my balance the way you check a weather app, before a trip you're already committed to taking. Not because it would change anything, just because not knowing felt worse than knowing something bad. I'd close the app a few seconds later, no more informed than before I opened it, and go about my day with the same low-level unease still sitting there. Then, almost by accident, I built a specific kind of budget that changed that completely. Not because it told me to spend less. It didn't. I spent almost the same amount of money the month after I built it as the month before. What changed was that, for the first time in years, I stopped carrying around a low hum of financial dread I hadn't even realized I was carrying. This isn't a video about restricting your spending. It's about a version of budgeting that has almost nothing to do with restriction at all. And once I understood why it worked, I understood why every other budget I'd ever tried had quietly failed within a few weeks. Let's start with a number worth sitting with. According to one of the largest annual budgeting surveys in the country, only about 1 in 5 people who made a budget last year actually stuck with it. Nearly 2/3 never even started one. And here's the detail that surprised researchers most this year. For the first time, "it takes too much time" overtook "I don't make enough money" as the number one reason people gave up. Budgets aren't failing because people are broke. They're failing because most budgets are built like a part-time job nobody signed up for. The strange part is that almost everyone who does manage to stick with some kind of budget says it worked. The same research found that the overwhelming majority of people who budget consistently credit it with getting them out of debt or keeping them out of it in the first place. The gap here isn't between budgeting and not budgeting. It's between the budgets that survive long enough to actually help and the ones that quietly get abandoned before they get the chance to. Here's the myth worth killing first. We treat a budget like a leash, something that tells you no. The kind of budget that actually changed things for me works almost the opposite way. It's closer to a permission slip. Every dollar gets assigned a specific job in advance before you spend a single one of them. And once a dollar has a job, spending it isn't a decision you have to feel guilty about anymore. It already had somewhere to go. There's a second myth right next to that one, that doing this properly means tracking every purchase down to the penny, forever, with no room for estimation. It doesn't. Rounding a category to the nearest $10 works just as well as tracking it exactly, as long as every dollar still has somewhere it's assigned to go. The plan doesn't need to be perfectly precise to close the open loop. It just needs to exist. I know this might sound like it contradicts something I've talked about before, that the simplest systems track as little as possible, sometimes just one number. It doesn't, really. Tracking one number tells you whether you're on course. This is about what happens before that, the moment income actually arrives and has to be pointed somewhere. You can give every dollar a job using a small handful of buckets. This was never about creating more categories. It was about making sure the ones you do have are actually decided on purpose, instead of drifting wherever attention happens to land that week. A friend of mine tried a much stricter version a couple of years back. A hard weekly spending cap, no exceptions, tracked to the dollar. It worked beautifully for exactly 5 weeks. Then a friend's birthday landed in a week that was already tight. She went over the cap by $30, and something in her just gave up on the whole system that same night, as if one bad week had somehow undone every good one before it. The problem was never her discipline. It was that her budget had no room in it for the plan to bend. Mine did. Almost by accident. And that turned out to be the entire difference between a system she abandoned in 5 weeks and one I'm still using 2 years later. Let's run a quick experiment. Imagine your paycheck as a stack of unopened letters the moment it lands. Bills, groceries, savings, a night out with friends, an oil change you know is coming eventually. Traditional budgeting opens those letters as they arrive, reacting to each one in the moment. This kind of budgeting opens every letter on day one. decides what each one gets, and then simply lets the month play out. The math is the same either way. The mental experience is not even close. There's a reason that difference matters more than it sounds like it should, and it comes from a corner of psychology that has nothing to do with money at all. Researchers Roy Baumeister and E.J. Masacampo ran a series of experiments on something called the Zeigarnik effect, the well-documented tendency for unfinished tasks to nag at your attention far more than finished ones do. Their specific discovery was the surprising part. You don't actually have to finish the task to make the nagging stop. You just have to make a specific plan for it. In their studies, people given an unfinished goal experienced intrusive thoughts about it during a completely unrelated task, until they were asked to write down a concrete plan for finishing it later. Once the plan existed, the intrusive thoughts dropped away almost entirely, even though the task itself was still, technically, unfinished. Watch what happens when you apply that to money sitting undecided in a checking account. Every dollar without a job is a small, unfinished task your brain is quietly tracking in the background, the same way it tracks an unanswered email or an unmade decision. That's the low hum I mentioned at the start. Not one big worry, just dozens of small, undecided dollars, each one a tiny, open loop. Give every one of them a plan, even a simple one, and the hum doesn't get louder when you spend one on something fun. It goes quiet, because there's nothing left open for your mind to keep circling back to. There's a version of this idea that's a lot older than any budgeting app. Long before spreadsheets, households used to physically divide cash into envelopes, one for rent, one for groceries, one for whatever else mattered that month, and once an envelope was empty, spending in that category simply stopped until the next payday. The practice became especially common during periods when money was tight and every dollar genuinely had to count, long before budgeting was a category of app on anyone's phone. It was clumsy and entirely manual, but the core idea underneath it is exactly the one Baumeister and Masacampo would go on to explain decades later. Assign the money before you need it, and the decision about, can I afford this, gets made once, in advance, instead of being relitigated every single time you're standing at a register. More people are attempting some version of this than in recent memory. The share of Americans who say they follow a monthly budget has climbed several points over just the past few years, back above half the country for the first time in a while. More people trying isn't the missing piece. The method usually is. Here's where this kind of budgeting earns its name. Every dollar gets assigned until there's nothing left unassigned. Not necessarily nothing left to spend, but nothing left undecided. If a dollar isn't going toward a bill, it's going toward savings or investing or a specific fun money bucket you get to spend without a second thought, because you already decided in advance that this was allowed. The number at the end isn't zero because you're broke. It's zero because every dollar already has an assignment, the same way every letter got opened and answered instead of piling up on the counter. The name isn't new, either, even if the personal version of it feels that way. Businesses and governments were using a formal version of this same idea back in the 1970s, building each year's budget from scratch and justifying every dollar on its own merits, rather than simply adjusting last year's numbers up or down. It never fully caught on as a government-wide practice. Large institutions have their own reasons for resisting a system that demands this much intentional justification. But the core habit scaled down to a household kitchen table just fine, for the same reason it always struggled to scale up to an entire federal budget. It works best with a small number of people actually willing to look every dollar in the eye. I still remember building mine for the first time, sitting at my kitchen table with my actual income in front of me instead of a projected, hoped-for version of it. That distinction turned out to matter more than I expected. Most budgets are built around income you expect to receive. This one is built around money that's already arrived. There's no guessing, no, I'll probably make about this much. Just the actual number, assigned in full, before the month gets a chance to spend it for you. That shift exposed something I'd been quietly ignoring for years: the expenses that don't show up monthly. Car registration, a friend's wedding gift, the holiday season. Because they didn't arrive on a predictable schedule, I'd never actually budgeted for them at all. They just showed up, every few months, feeling like a surprise even though, if I'm honest, none of them ever actually were. This kind of budgeting has a name for that blind spot: treating your true expenses as real, even the irregular ones, by taking an annual cost and quietly setting aside a slice of it every single month, long before the bill ever shows up. Take something like an annual car registration and holiday spending combined, say $600 a year between them. Set aside $50 a month instead, and by the time either bill actually arrives, the money's already been sitting there waiting, like it was never a surprise at all. A $500 car repair you saw coming feels completely different from one you didn't, even though the dollar amount never changes. One is a plan. The other is an emergency wearing a plan's clothing. This works a little differently if your income moves around instead of arriving the same amount every 2 weeks. I have a cousin who freelances, and for a while she assumed this kind of planning simply wasn't built for someone whose paycheck changes every month. It still works. It just starts from the actual number that landed, whatever it was, instead of an assumed one. A lean month gets a leaner set of assignments. A strong month gets more spread across savings and those irregular true expense buckets, catching up faster than a fixed monthly plan ever could. The order in which the money gets assigned doesn't change. Only the total being divided does. It changes something between two people sharing money too, in a way I didn't expect until I saw it happen. Money disagreements are consistently one of the more common sources of tension between couples, and a lot of that friction isn't really about the dollar amount. It's about one person feeling questioned after the fact for a purchase the other didn't know was coming. When every dollar already has a job the two of you agreed on in advance, that particular argument mostly disappears, not because you're suddenly more aligned as people, but because the decision already happened, calmly, before either of you was standing in a store deciding whether to bring it up. Here's the part that finally made this stick for me in a way no previous attempt had. Every other budget I'd tried treated going over a category as failure, proof the whole system, and maybe I myself, wasn't working. This one treats it as information. Spent too much on groceries this week? Take it from next week's dining out money or from savings and move on. The month isn't ruined. The plan just gets adjusted, the same way you'd reroute around traffic instead of turning the car around and driving home. I remember the first time I actually did this without any guilt at all. I'd gone about $40 over on groceries one week. Nothing dramatic, just a bigger grocery run than usual. And instead of the spiral of guilt I used to feel, I just moved $40 over from a category that had padding to spare and kept going. The whole adjustment took about 90 seconds. The version of me from a few years earlier would have quietly decided the entire month was a write-off and stopped tracking anything until the following one. A rigid budget breaks the first time real life disagrees with it. A flexible one bends instead. And bending is a lot cheaper than starting over from scratch every time something doesn't go exactly as planned. There's one more shift this kind of budgeting eventually leads to, though it usually takes months to arrive rather than showing up on day one. Spending money that's already a little bit old. Most people are functionally spending each paycheck the moment it lands, covering bills that are due before the next one even arrives, which means they're always exactly one paycheck behind reacting to their own life. The further you get into this, the more that gap closes, until eventually the money you're spending in a given week isn't the paycheck that just landed. It's the one from a month or more ago, already assigned, already accounted for, only now getting spent. It sounds like a small technical detail. In practice, it's the difference between constantly reacting to your income and finally getting a full month ahead of it. If you've watched the videos on the order money should move through, or on automating an emergency fund, this budget is the missing piece underneath both of them. Automation only works once you've decided how much goes where. This is that decision, made once, instead of being remade every payday. The automated transfers are the hands. This is what tells them where to go. Starting one doesn't require a perfect first attempt. Sit down with whatever landed in your account this month. List the handful of buckets that actually matter to you: bills, savings, a couple of true expense funds, one bucket for guilt-free spending, and assign every dollar to one of them until there's nothing left over. The first month will probably be wrong in a few places. That's fine. Move money between buckets as you go, the same way you'd adjust a recipe the second time you make it. By the third or fourth month, the plan mostly just runs itself, because you've already made most of the decisions it needs. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud, and it's the actual reason any of this works. A budget was never really a math problem. If it were, everyone would have solved it years ago with a calculator and a bit of patience. It's an attention problem, dressed up in the language of dollars and cents. The version of budgeting that actually lasts isn't the one with the most detailed categories, or the strictest limits, or the most impressive-looking spreadsheet. It's the one that closes every open loop in advance, so your attention gets to stop circling back to money you haven't decided about yet, and gets to spend itself on literally anything else instead. Picture the same person, checking the same banking app, a year apart. A year earlier, she opens it, sees a number, and feels a small flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly, just an unresolved question sitting underneath the number. A year later, she opens the same app, sees a similar number, and feels almost nothing at all. Not because the number got bigger, because there's no unresolved question left underneath it. Every dollar already knows what it's for. I think about that low hum a lot, the one I didn't even realize I was carrying until it was gone. It wasn't loud. It never announced itself as a problem worth fixing. It just sat quietly in the background of every single day, the small tax of a few dozen undecided dollars, until one ordinary kitchen table afternoon made it disappear almost entirely, without a single dollar of my income actually changing. A budget was never about spending less. It was about deciding once, so you never have to decide again. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about understanding money in a way that actually works in real life, not just on a whiteboard. That's exactly what this channel is all about. Every week, I break down personal finance, investing, budgeting, and wealth building into simple, practical lessons anyone can use. If that sounds like something you'd find valuable, consider subscribing. I'd love to have you here. Because the next time you open your banking app and feel that small flicker of dread before you've even looked at the number, ask yourself what it would take to give every dollar in there a job, today, before it has the chance to sit there undecided for one more week. That flicker isn't about the number. It never was. It's just the sound of a decision waiting to be made.